I am sitting here with Cristiana Tiberio of the Tiberio Winery in Abruzzo, located more particularly in Cunoli, which is a small province in the area that's more in the mountainous interior of Abruzzo. I'm constantly talking about the differences between the mountainous areas versus the coastal areas and just how different the wines are. And in my opinion, Cristiana has done a fantastic job of really showing that to the world. But one of the things I really wanted to talk about, because I think at this point we've heard the story, I've been talking about your story for a very long time, but one of the most interesting things that I find about your wines is that while we have certain wines like the Fonte Canale, which has certainly become one of the premier labels around the world when it comes to white wines from Italy, I think it's extremely important to also talk about your Trebbiano d'Abruzzo. So these are both Trebbiano d'Abruzzo, this one being a very particular bottling that's garnered a lot of acclaim around the world. But what I would really like for you to do is to tell us a little bit about how these wines differ, their location, the vine material, and how they're made, so that we can then understand, also, in my opinion, why this wine presents an amazing value to consumers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is a very important aspect for me because these two wines comes from the same grape variety, which is the Trebbiano Abruzzese. The Fonte Canale comes from these super old vines, 95 years old, totally ungrafted. But my classic Trebbiano comes from 75 years old vines. Some of them are ungrafted, not all of them, because we have different content in the subsoil. This is the main aspect that changed the destiny of these two vines. So the Fonte Canale vines survived ungrafted because there is sand in the subsoil. In the area where the classic Trebbiano Abruzzese vines are located, I have mostly marley clay. So these vines have been replanted 15 years later, the original plantation of old vineyard. The training system is the same and is the Pergola Abruzzese. To be more precise, is a double Pergola Abruzzese. So the competition in the subsoil is the same for both the vines and the roots. The density of the canopy is the same, so the bunches are affected by the same level of the shade. What makes these vines, fruit and wine different is the geology. But both represent the characteristic not just of this grape variety, but the characteristic of this terroir, this geology, and these vines had this privilege to adapt in almost 8 decades to the specific condition of this terroir. So I like to talk about specific elements that affect even the genetic heritage of these vines, unique vines, and I see the differences when I propagate these vines with a new plantation, with massal selection, that in the old plants there is much more, of course, balance and adaptation. The winemaking is the same, so it's a stainless steel, but the indigenous yeast are slightly different because, of course, the harvest time is slightly different, and so the trend of the fermentation is different. The level of the lees and the quality of the lees is different.
When you talk about harvest time, I mean, how much of a difference are we talking about?
10 days, yeah, can be 5 days to 10 days, depends on the vintage, of course. In a cooler vintage, we have more extension, more distance between the two different harvests. In a hot vintage, when the growing season is more compressed, can be just 5 days. But what is very important for me to express with my classic Trebbiano, which is the first wine, and for me the most historical wine, I was able to understand the real meaning of this grape variety. I was able to understand the meaning of the pergola, the microsystem that exists under the pergola, which is not just a way to prune, but defines a very different microsystem with a different level of humidity, different shade, of course, different spontaneous cover crop, and different insect. Good insect, able to feed and to breed a specific family of indigenous yeast. So my classic Trebbiano represent the pureness of these old vines, able to extract the deep meaning of this subsoil. It's a complex wine, it's fresh, it's not a simple wine. Just because I released this wine earlier, but for me it's important to give even the sense of this wine in an early stage of its life. And because I think to feed and so to satisfy, to spread out the wine culture, we need this kind of classic wines that offer us the chance to enjoy a beautiful, great glass of wine every day, not just in special occasions, because these represent the wine culture. So wine, which is part of our meal, of our daily attitude, not just an occasion to celebrate a special event or stuff like that, but wine is part of our culture, meal, education, and I think this classic Trebbiano d'Abruzzo has an important, crucial role in this sense.
Well, I think it's really important to recognize that many producers here in Abruzzo that are putting out Trebbiano d'Abruzzo into the market, that they're even considering to be their premium labels, are coming from vines that don't necessarily even have the 75 years of vine age that we're talking about here. So I mean, in my opinion, this is also like a great wine for like a wine list buy if you're going to a restaurant, because I can tell you in the United States, typically a wine will be marked up 3 times on a wine list. And if you think about it, you can go into a restaurant and you could purchase a bottle like this for $75, maybe even a little less if the place is a little bit more value oriented, and be drinking incredibly well. So great. So the Trebbiano, certainly, like I was saying, amazing value buy, but then as I've spoken about the Fonte Canale, a wine that ages remarkably well, which actually brings up the question, how well have you seen that your Trebbiano d'Abruzzo ages? Would you put this bottle away for 5 or 6 years and feel that you'd still be...
Yes, absolutely, yes. This is what we do, and we enjoy some old vintages of this wine, and it's a brilliant wine, able to develop depth, complexity in the flavors. Absolutely. The ageability, of course, comes from the age of these vines, and of course our touch in the winery is very delicate. It's a spontaneous fermentation. I'm very protective with the skins of this fruit, so not focus on the over extraction. I'm proud to preserve the pH of these wines, and the classic Trebbiano d'Abruzzo wine has a very low pH, which is an important condition to preserve the natural health of this wine and its capability to age. Absolutely.
Which then also brings me to the Montepulciano d'Abruzzo. So what I think is really funny about this wine, I think I told you about this a while back. This is going back 6, 7, 8 years. This was always my favorite wine to gift people for Christmas. And the reason, well, not just only that I wanted to really introduce people to Montepulciano d'Abruzzo, but also to your wines, but to also show them how much value they could find in the wine market today. And this is another great example. I think the most important thing to talk about here when it comes to this, we'll talk about the vines and such, because we have another Montepulciano d'Abruzzo, the Archivio over here, which is another one of your premium labels, is that this wine is vinified completely in steel tank, correct?
Yes.
And so it's really amazing tasting a Montepulciano d'Abruzzo and then realizing with all the depth and concentration that it can be done in steel tank, but also thinking about another winery that most of you guys are going to know about, Emidio Pepe. Their wines don't ever see any wood either, and I think it's really important to consider that when it comes to Montepulciano. But what we have here is we have your Montepulciano d'Abruzzo, an amazing value, amazing complexity in this wine, and then we have the Archivio. So maybe give us an idea of the differences between these two wines from the vines and the winemaking, because this one does see a little bit of wood, but it's done very well. But yes, please. Let me know.
Yeah, so the classic Trebbiano comes from 3 vineyards. One is an old vineyard, 60 years old. The other vineyards are 22 years old, and it's a stainless steel Montepulciano, where for me it's super important to represent the identity of the Montepulciano grape and wine coming from this area. So it's a very terroir-driven Montepulciano. I think the identity of this wine is the purity of these vines and fruit, but not in a simple way, because the Montepulciano can have a natural complexity which belongs to the fruit, to the vines and the terroir where these vines are from, not from the winemaking or the material we use and select for winemaking. So since my beginning, I didn't want to make a stylistic Montepulciano, because I was and I'm still very proud of the important heritage of this grape variety. So it's a Montepulciano capable to express fruitiness, but not just simple ripened red fruit, but fresh red fruit with a touch of crunchiness, a little bit of citrusy like blood orange. The tannins, of course, are vibrant. It's a very lively Montepulciano, dynamic, but the tannins are ripen, smooth, because that's the origin of the fruit, having this long growing season where the tannins can fully ripen, the acidity stays bright, and so the result is a very pure, fresh, elegant Montepulciano with complexity of the flavors and beautiful texture. The Archivio comes from a special portion of our old Montepulciano vineyard, which is a pergola, a double pergola, 60 years old. But these vines are located in a precise area where we have a little bit more clay than the rest of our property and Montepulciano vineyards. And the clay makes a big difference in these vines adaptation and in the result in the fruit. So there is a little wood, oak, not because I wanted to change the flavors or to interfere with the destiny of this fruit, but the result is a more reductive Montepulciano fruit that need a different content of oxygen, and so that's why I decided to introduce oak in order to give the suitable amount of oxygen, of course suitable and slow amount of oxygen over the months. The result is a Montepulciano with more texture compared to my classic Montepulciano, because the clay naturally gives more texture to the fruit and to the wines, with a little bit more extraction, not because I do something different in pushing the extraction, but the skins naturally release more protein, more pigments, And in the flavors, there is more complexity and depth, even because the release time of this wine happens later, so there is more release contact, and but coming from a different origin of this fruit.
And I think it's also really important to consider that this is very much a mountainous area in Abruzzo. These are not going to be anything like the Montepulciano d'Abruzzo that you would be getting closer to the coast. These wines have a certain verticality to them that really set them apart. But one thing you mentioned actually brought up a little bit more of a geeky question that I have for you, is that you had mentioned reduction, and I know that Montepulciano can be prone to reduction. So how do you deal with that when aging your wine in steel tank?
Yeah, exactly. That's an interesting point, because I think the reduction is part of the Montepulciano identity, but it's not a deep reduction affecting the flavors in a bad way. The first element I learned over the years, very important, is the selection of the fruit. So to avoid the problem of the reduction, it's super important to select the fruit, because the Montepulciano is a late ripening grape variety. We harvest the Montepulciano mid-October, sometimes end of October, so the climate starts to be quite foggy with humidity, and of course if you want to reach out the phenolic ripeness, the complete ripeness, we have to take some risk and we have to select the fruit. Mm-hmm. So it's very important, the selection, to have a healthy fruit, just a healthy fruit in the tank. In this way the quality of the lees is high quality, the lees are flavorful, and even the bacteria are good bacteria, so there are multiple levels of reduction. In this way, to be honest, we don't have to rank the wine often, even if it's stainless steel. I taste the wines regularly and when necessary, and if necessary I rank the wine, of course, and it happens one in 4 months. Mm-hmm. And it's enough to move the lees and to bring a little bit more oxygen, and to avoid the deep problem of reduction with some funky flavors or rustic flavors. And even during the fermentation, the point is to be able to understand what is the good level of the extraction. So we don't force the extraction, we don't stress the skins, it's a gentle extraction, we keep the skins always wet into the juice, but we don't crash in a deep, aggressive way. Because the Montepulciano is a generous grape variety, and so release a lot and very fast to the juice at the beginning, and so it's very important to preserve the texture of the skins and the right balance of the extraction. In this way, according to my experience, the level of the reduction is the natural level of reduction that the wine is able to digest in the bottle, with a little élevage in bottle after bottling, and with the natural amount of oxygen coming through the wines with a little ranking.
Excellent. And what I can also say that I have most recently had the 2014 from my own cellar. These wines age remarkably well. I'm a big proponent of talking about wines that are really affordable, that can go into the cellar and can provide you with a tremendous drinking window. And this is certainly one of them. Like I said, I think the 14 is the oldest one that I have in my own cellar, but it's still showing beautifully. They age really well. And we only have a little bit more time here, but one last thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about your Pecorino really quick. So you have a new Pecorino label that has just recently been released with the 2023 vintage, correct?
Yeah.
Now I don't have that bottle in front of me, but I'll make sure I put a picture of it up in this video so you guys can see. But for the longest time, this Pecorino, and I've been talking to you about, are you gonna take it to the next level? And you did. You ended up doing all this research into different biotypes and deciding on this, if I'm not mistaken, a combination of 2 of the biotypes. Well, actually, let me let you explain. So tell us about the new label of Pecorino that you have. And just before you say, to preface this has always been my wine that I go to. I like to think of it as a bulletproof wine, where if I have a really bad night of pulling bottles and I can't find the thing that I really want to drink, this is the one I go to. But please, tell us about the new Pecorino.
Yeah, the new Pecorino, the Cormery is the name, is a special biotype coming from the central part of our Pecorino vineyard. Our Pecorino vineyard is 3.8 hectares, the central part is 1 hectare. It's the first portion we planted in 2000 using the massal selections of the original 7 mother plants of Pecorino we found in our property. And the next year, 21, we planted the other 2 vines on the right and left side of the central part. So what's happened over the years, the decades, is that these vines mutated according to different slopes we have in this vineyard, according to slightly different subsoil, not soil, and mainly according to the sun exposure, because this vineyard is a kind of amphitheater, curving a little bit, so the way how the sunlight affect the vineyards, different portions of this vineyard is different, and these affect the development of the canopy, of course, the level of the medium temperature even of different portion of this vineyard. The result has been over the decades that in the central part the Pecorino developed and still develops a more compact branches. The skins of these berries is thicker, the leaves are smaller, the harvest time is completely different, the acidity is much higher, so it's Pecorino always, but over the years respect this unique character, so not just a fluke happening once in a while, but vintage by vintage this fruit develops specific characteristic, and the wine is different, so it's the same winemaking. Once again, when we release a wine later, there is more lees contact, so the only difference in the winemaking is just this, more lees contact. But I have to say, even the quality and the dimension of the lees is super important and it's different. We don't talk enough about the dimension of the lees, but according to different texture of the skins, the fruit release different dimension of leaves, and when the leaves is thin, usually gives works in a better way with the wine, the juice and the wine after. When the leaves are bigger, that's the point they can give a problem of reduction, and it's something that never happens with this Pecorino because the skins are so thick that the leaves are lighter in color, smaller. The flavor profile is different. Tasting the leaves is becoming one of my most interesting aspect to do during harvest after ranking the wine, and gave me important informations about the quality of the fruit, about the capability of age of the future wine, and even if I can keep the wine for a longer time on the lees in the tank. So the only difference in terms of winemaking between the classic Pecorino and Quarmari, which is the single vineyard biotype, is the lees contact. But because these lees are different in quality.
Yeah, it's amazing because I had a lot of fun tasting as you were testing for this bottling. I had a lot of fun tasting between the different locations of Pecorino. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. There you have it. I mean, if I had a message for today, it would be that while we as collectors really chase after these prestige bottlings, which in the case of Tiberio are certainly worth it, it really is important to keep in mind that there is tremendous value to be found here as well, and that's something that Cristiana Tiberio and her brother Antonio have worked really hard to make sure that they can continue to provide to consumers. Thank you, Cristiana.
Thank you very much, Eric.